I need to tell you something that happened to me, something that began exactly 24 hours ago. What I'm about to describe is going to sound absolutely impossible, beyond the bounds of what we consider normal reality. But I must speak this truth, and I swear on everything I hold sacred, my faith, my family, my very soul, that every single word I am about to share is true. I was sitting alone on a stretch of beach in Malibu as the sun began its final, glorious descent into the Pacific Ocean. My heart was a tangled knot of uncertainty, a feeling that had become my constant companion in the months after my time on The Chosen had concluded. I felt utterly overwhelmed, adrift in a sea of questions about my future. It was in that moment of profound vulnerability that God Himself appeared beside me. He didn't arrive in a clap of thunder or blinding light, but with a quiet, grounding presence that made the world stand still. And then, He showed me a vision of what He has planned. A vision so shocking, so magnificent, so far beyond anything I could have possibly imagined, that it left me physically trembling with a mixture of pure awe and exhilarating excitement. What He revealed to me wasn't just about my personal future, about what my next career move should be. It was about a global movement. He is orchestrating a divine symphony that will fundamentally transform how the entire world perceives faith, reality, and the very nature of God. And here is the most astonishing part. You, the person listening to my voice right now, might be a part of this movement in ways you have never, ever expected. But before I delve into the heart of my story, I feel a deep need to connect with you. Please, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. In this moment, sharing something so immense and personal, I just want to know that I'm not alone. And if what you hear resonates within your spirit, if it moves you in some way, please consider subscribing. It may seem like a small thing, but it gives me the strength and courage to continue speaking my truth, no matter how unbelievable it may sound. Now, let's begin. The emptiness of success. I'm recording this from my apartment in Malibu. I moved here 6 months ago, not for the glamour or the celebrity scene, but in a desperate search for peace and clarity. My life had become a paradox. My public profile had never been higher, yet my inner compass had never felt more lost. It's 7 p.m. right now, and by all accounts I should be getting ready for a dinner engagement with friends. But I can't. I am physically and spiritually unable to do anything but process the stunning, reality-altering vision God showed me yesterday evening on that beach. What He revealed has not just reoriented my path, it has completely revolutionized my understanding of my own calling, and more importantly, the incredible divine purpose He has for this generation of believers. To understand the weight of that moment, you need to understand the crisis that led me there. 3 months ago, the carefully constructed world I had built around my future began to unravel. It was a process that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. The final season of The Chosen had wrapped production. For 6 years, that show had been more than a job. It had been my identity, my ministry, my purpose. It was my daily, tangible connection to God's work in the world. And suddenly, it was over. For the first time in a long time, I had no clear next step. Without it, I felt like a compass spinning wildly, searching for a true north that had vanished. The offers that began to flood in after the show ended were, for the most part, deeply disheartening. Hollywood producers, eager to capitalize on the recognition I'd gained, presented me with opportunities that felt hollow and spiritually compromising. Most of the roles felt like a significant step backward, not a progression. They were purely commercial projects, big-budget films with no meaningful content, where my presence would be used as a marketing tool. Then there were the faith-based films, many of which felt formulaic, preachy, and utterly lacking in the raw, human authenticity that had been the very soul of The Chosen and made it so powerful. I found myself in the strangest and most isolating position imaginable. I was more recognizable than ever, yet I felt more profoundly uncertain about my purpose than I had since my early 20s, when I was just another struggling actor. People made assumptions. They assumed that the man who had portrayed Jesus for 6 years would have a direct line to heaven, a crystal clear understanding of divine direction. The truth? I had never felt more spiritually confused in my entire life. The silence from heaven felt deafening. 2 months ago, I made a decision that shocked my entire team, my agent, my manager, my publicist. I turned down 3 major film offers, projects that would have guaranteed financial security for years to come. I told my agent I was taking an indefinite break from acting. I needed to seek God's will for the next season of my life, and I couldn't do that while being tempted by scripts that felt like a betrayal of the work I had just completed. I moved to Malibu, seeking the solitude of the ocean. I craved the ability to walk on the beach for hours, to think clearly, to pray without the relentless distractions of Los Angeles traffic, industry meetings, and the constant pressure to stay relevant. But clarity did not come. Instead, the solitude only amplified the questions that haunted me. What was I supposed to do with this immense platform God had given me through the show? How could I serve him in a way that built upon what he had already done, rather than simply repeating it? Was I meant to continue acting? Was I supposed to pivot into full-time ministry, write books, start a production company that created authentic faith content, or do something completely different that I hadn't even considered? Every morning I would walk the length of the beach, my feet sinking into the wet sand as I pleaded with God for direction. Every evening I would sit and watch the sunset, begging for some sign, some whisper, some nudge that would tell me what he wanted from me next. But the heavens remained stubbornly silent. My prayers felt as if they were hitting a brass ceiling, bouncing off the clouds and falling back to earth unanswered, never reaching the throne room of God. The breaking point. The crisis reached its peak 3 weeks ago. I received a phone call that, on the surface, should have been the answer to all my prayers. Instead, it filled me with a profound and inexplicable sense of dread. A major Christian media company, one of the largest in the world, wanted to offer me a multi-million-dollar development deal. The offer was staggering. I would create, produce, and star in my own faith-based television series. I would have complete creative control, the kind of offer actors and producers dream about for their entire careers. But as the executive on the other end of the line laid out the details, I felt no excitement. Instead, a wave of panic washed over me. It wasn't because the opportunity was bad, it was objectively fantastic. The panic came from the chilling realization that I had absolutely no idea if it aligned with God's perfect will for my life. How can you make a decision involving millions of dollars and a multi-year commitment when you cannot hear the voice of the one whose approval matters most? I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of agonizing indecision. I extended the deadline twice, asking for more time to pray and consider. Everyone around me, my agent, my family, my closest friends, thought I was insane for hesitating. "This is the perfect next step," my agent insisted. "This is financial security for the rest of your life," my business manager urged. "This will allow you to continue serving God through entertainment on an even bigger scale," my family encouraged. But something deep within my spirit felt unsettled. It wasn't a feeling that the opportunity was wrong, but a persistent, nagging uncertainty that it might not be right. Through my years portraying Jesus, I had learned a crucial lesson. God's will isn't always a simple choice between a good option and a bad one. Sometimes, the most important choices we face are between the good and the best, between what makes perfect logical sense and what requires a terrifying leap of faith. Yesterday morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. I knew I had to make a final decision by 5 p.m. The company had been more than patient, but they needed an answer. I couldn't delay any longer. I spent the entire day in prayer, my Bible open on my lap, pages filled with highlighted verses that had guided me in the past. I called trusted spiritual advisors, hoping for a word of wisdom that would cut through my confusion. But by 4 p.m., I felt no clearer about God's direction than I had weeks earlier. At 4:30, in a last desperate attempt to hear from God, I decided to walk to the beach one final time before making the call. It felt like the most important decision of my professional and spiritual life rested on the next 30 minutes. I was hoping, praying, that in the sacred moments of watching the sunset over the vast Pacific, God would finally break his long silence and give me the clear direction I so desperately needed. I found a quiet spot on the sand, far from the usual Malibu crowds. The beach was nearly empty, save for a few distant joggers and someone walking their dog. It was the perfect, serene environment for what I hoped would be a decisive and intimate conversation with God. "Father," I said out loud, my voice small against the immense expanse of water and sky, "I cannot make this decision without you. I have been seeking your direction for months, and I still feel lost. I don't know what you want me to do next. This television deal, it seems good. It seems like a blessing. But I need to know, Father, if it's your good, or just a good that man has devised." The waves continued their eternal, rhythmic crash against the shore, The seagulls called to one another as they skimmed the surf, searching for their evening meal. The normal, beautiful sounds of a normal evening in a world filled with people facing decisions that feel far too big for human wisdom alone. I am willing to take the deal if that's what you want, I continued, my voice thick with desperation, and I am willing to turn it down if you have something else planned. I am willing to wait indefinitely if that is what faith requires of me, but I need you to show me something. Anything. Please, help me understand what role you want me to play in whatever you are doing next in this world. As the sun's blazing edge finally touched the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking strokes of fiery orange, deep violet, and soft pink, I found myself asking the one question that had been haunting me for months, the question at the very core of my being. God, what is my future? Not just the next project or the next paycheck. What is the real future you have planned for me? What are you preparing me for that I cannot yet see? What is the bigger story you are writing? And what is my part in it? The moment those words left my lips, something extraordinary began to happen. The very air around me started to shimmer, not like heat waves rising from asphalt, but like reality itself was becoming more vivid, more intensely alive. The colors of the sunset deepened beyond anything natural, as if a divine artist was applying fresh, vibrant paint to the canvas of the sky. The sound of the waves seemed to harmonize, the rhythmic crashing transforming into something that resembled a majestic, celestial music. And then, sitting on the sand right beside me, as naturally and calmly as if he had been there all along, was God the Father. His presence was not overwhelming in a frightening way, but in a way that was profoundly comforting and awe-inspiring. In an instant, that ordinary beach was transformed into a sacred space, the very edge of eternity, the place where time meets forever and where human plans intersect with divine purposes. His first words were not what I expected, but they were exactly what my soul needed to hear. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice carried the authority of creation itself, yet held the unmistakable tenderness of a father sharing profound secrets with his beloved child. "You have been asking about your future as if it is a separate thing from my future. But what I am about to show you will reveal that your next chapter isn't just about your calling. It is about the greatest spiritual awakening the world has seen in generations. And you are going to play a role you never, ever imagined." My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest, a rapid rhythm of anticipation, fear, and utter awe. What do you mean?" I stammered. God smiled, and that simple, loving smile seemed to make the entire Pacific Ocean sparkle with a new, reflected glory. "Are you ready to see what I am really preparing you for? Because once you understand the vision I am about to share, everything changes. Not just for you, but for millions of people across this earth who are hungry for an authentic encounter with me." I could only nod, a single silent consent, knowing that whatever he was about to reveal would irrevocably transform everything I thought I knew about my purpose and his grand cosmic plans. "Then close your eyes," God said, his voice filled with gentle command, "because I am going to show you the future in a way that will astound you, a vision of the impossible." I closed my eyes as God instructed, and in that instant the sensation of sand beneath me and the cool ocean breeze on my skin vanished. I was no longer sitting on a Malibu beach. I was suspended in a place that felt like the space between time and eternity, a divine observation deck from which I could see events unfolding across years and continents. It was as if I were watching a divine movie, a story projected directly into my consciousness. "The first thing you need to understand about your future, Jonathan," God's voice surrounded me, both intimate and immense, "is that it is not about your career advancement. It is about my kingdom advancement. What I am preparing you for is not just the next role or the next project. It is the next great move of my spirit on this earth. And you are going to be one of the catalysts." Suddenly, a scene materialized before me. I could see myself 5 years in the future, but in a context I had never once imagined. I saw myself standing on a massive stage before a colossal crowd in a stadium that stretched as far as my eye could see. But I wasn't performing. I wasn't acting in a play or a film. I was sharing my testimony, leading people in worship, and facilitating direct, powerful encounters with the divine. The presence of God in that place was so tangible it was like a physical substance. I watched as people were being physically healed, spiritually transformed, and emotionally restored right where they stood, without any human hype or manipulation. This is the future I am preparing you for, God explained, his voice resonating with the vision, not just entertainment that mentions me, but encounters that reveal me, not just stories about faith, but experiences of faith that change lives permanently. I watched in utter astonishment as the vision showed me events that my logical mind screamed were impossible. In London, I saw myself speaking to 80,000 people packed into Wembley Stadium. But when I finished speaking, the presence of God fell so powerfully that thousands upon thousands were instantly healed of physical ailments, cancer, blindness, paralysis, as well as deep emotional wounds and spiritual bondage. The scene was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. It wasn't a concert, a conference, or a religious service. It was a genuine, undeniable outpouring of divine power. But I'm not an evangelist, I protested, my spirit reeling from what I was seeing. I'm an actor. I don't have the gifts for that kind of ministry. The second truth about your future, God replied gently, is that I am not calling you based on the gifts you currently possess. I am calling you based on the gifts I am going to give you. The platform you gained through The Chosen was only the beginning. The recognition you have, the trust people have placed in you, the spiritual authority you have developed through that role, all of it was preparation for what comes next. The vision shifted, like changing channels on a celestial television. I saw myself in different contexts all over the world. I was in a massive arena in São Paulo, Brazil, speaking to over 100,000 people about the radical, unconditional reality of God's love. I was in a stadium in Seoul, South Korea, witnessing supernatural healings sweep through the crowd as I simply prayed for them. I saw myself in venues across Africa, America, Europe, and Asia, seeing God move in ways that I had only ever read about in the book of Acts. But what shocked me most wasn't the size of the crowds, or even the dramatic manifestations of God's power. It was the profound authenticity of what was happening. This wasn't religious performance or emotional manipulation. These were genuine, life-altering encounters between hungry, desperate souls and a loving God who was revealing himself in undeniable, irrefutable ways. The third truth about your future, God continued, is that this is not about building your ministry or your brand. It is about you participating in the greatest spiritual harvest in human history. What you are seeing is just one small part of a global awakening I am orchestrating right now. Millions of people around the world are spiritually starving. They are hungry for a real encounter with me. And I am raising up voices they already know and trust to guide them into that encounter. The vision then broadened, pulling back to show me the bigger picture. I saw not just my own future ministry, but a worldwide movement of authentic spiritual awakening. I witnessed other believers, people I had never met, each with their own unique callings, working together in a coordinated, supernatural outpouring of God's presence. I saw musicians whose concerts spontaneously turned into healing services. I saw world-class athletes who used their platforms to facilitate miraculous demonstrations of God's power in press conferences. I saw business leaders who were transforming entire industries through divine wisdom and strategies. This is why The Chosen was so successful, God explained. It was not just entertainment. It was preparation. It softened hearts. It created a spiritual hunger. It established trust. People who would never set foot inside a traditional church will come to an event to hear the man who portrayed my son. And when they come expecting a moment of inspiration, they will encounter a lifetime of transformation. The vision then showed me specific moments that left me breathless. I saw myself in Times Square, addressing a crowd of hundreds of thousands who had gathered spontaneously after word spread like wildfire about miraculous healings happening across New York City. I witnessed entire sections of people being instantly delivered from addiction, crippling depression, and deep-seated hopelessness as the tangible presence of God fell like a gentle rain among them. I saw myself in the most unlikely of places. I was a guest on secular television talk shows where my simple testimony about God's goodness and love triggered supernatural manifestations in the studio that left the hosts and producers speechless, unable to explain away what was happening. I saw myself on university campuses, where my talks about faith sparked revival movements that swept through schools across entire continents. I was at corporate events, where hardened, skeptical business leaders encountered God so powerfully that they restructured their entire companies around biblical principles of service and integrity. But the most shocking part of your future, God said, his voice now filled with a divine excitement, is what happens when you fully and completely surrender to this calling. The fourth truth is that I am going to use you not just to touch individual lives, but to demonstrate my power in ways that will convince the most hardened skeptics and transform entire cultures. I then watched scenes that seemed almost too incredible to be real. I saw myself at the United Nations, sharing a simple message about God's universal love for all people. As I spoke, I witnessed diplomats from warring nations begin to weep, reconciling with each other as the Holy Spirit moved powerfully through the General Assembly. I saw myself invited to speak at major secular universities, where the intellectual elite came to debate and challenge faith but left as believers, converted by undeniable encounters with divine truth and wisdom. Most shocking of all, I saw myself in private meetings with world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, and kings who were actively seeking counsel about how to govern their nations according to biblical principles. They sought this counsel not because of political maneuvering, but because the supernatural wisdom, peace, and tangible results that accompanied my ministry were so evident that even secular leaders recognized its immense value. The fifth truth about your future, God continued, is that this will require you to step completely and irrevocably outside your comfort zone. You will have to trust me for abilities you do not currently possess, for favor with people you have not earned, and for opportunities that seem utterly impossible from a human perspective. The sheer magnitude of what I was seeing was overwhelming. But how? I asked, my voice a whisper in the vastness of the vision. How does this happen? How do I get from where I am right now, a confused actor on a beach, to that? The sixth truth about your future is that it begins with the decision you are facing right now, God replied. That opportunity you are considering, the television development deal, it is not a wrong path, but it is not my best path for you. If you take it, you will have a very successful career. You will create good content that will bless many people. But if you turn it down and trust me for something bigger, something that requires more faith, you will participate in the supernatural transformation of millions of lives. The vision shifted again, showing me the alternative future if I accepted the television deal. I saw myself on set, creating high-quality, faith-based content. I saw the show being praised by critics and loved by audiences. It was good work, meaningful work, and it encouraged believers and even reached some non-believers. But it was limited by the boundaries of entertainment and media. It blessed people, but it did not transform them on the supernatural level I had just witnessed. The seventh truth about your future, God said, his voice gentle but firm, is that I am giving you a clear choice between the good and the supernatural. Both paths honor me, but only one path releases the fullness of what I want to do through your life. I could see the fork in the road as clearly as if it were drawn on a map. The television deal represented security, predictability, and continued success in a territory that was familiar to me. The alternative path represented complete and total dependence on God, supernatural empowerment, and an impact far beyond anything I could ever orchestrate through my own human effort. What would that alternative path look like practically, I asked. The eighth truth about your future is that it starts with saying no to lucrative opportunities that are not my best, and saying yes to faith, requiring steps that seem financially risky but are spiritually essential. God then showed me the immediate next steps. Instead of accepting the television deal, I would need to invest the next year of my life in intensive preparation. This wasn't about studying theology or developing ministry skills in a traditional sense. It was about cultivating a depth of relationship with Him that would be the foundation for a supernatural ministry. I saw myself spending months in dedicated prayer and fasting, traveling to learn from seasoned ministers who operated in powerful supernatural gifts, and most importantly, allowing God to do a much deeper work in my own heart. The ninth truth about your future, God continued, is that the supernatural ministry I am calling you to will require supernatural character. The pride, the insecurity, and the people-pleasing that you have struggled with as an actor would be magnified and become dangerous in this kind of ministry. I need to transform not just your calling, but your character. I saw glimpses of the painful but necessary internal work God wanted to do in me. He showed me how He would break down the areas of spiritual pride that had subtly developed from the fame of playing Jesus. He showed me how He would heal the deep wounds of insecurity that made me so dependent on human approval and affirmation. He showed me how he would develop the kind of profound humility that allows his power to flow without being contaminated by the human ego. The 10th and final truth about your future, God said, his voice becoming more intense and passionate, is that this is not ultimately about you at all. You are seeing yourself in these visions, because that is how I am choosing to reveal this specific calling to you. But the real purpose, the grand design, is demonstrating my love and my power to a world that has forgotten that both are real. I could finally see the entire tapestry. I saw how my individual calling was just one thread woven into a massive global movement. God was raising up voices across every sphere of influence to demonstrate his reality and love. Politicians, entertainers, athletes, business leaders, educators, all were being called to a form of supernatural ministry that would reveal God's character and power within their specific spheres of influence. This is the greatest evangelistic opportunity in human history, God explained. It will not happen through slick programs or marketing campaigns. It will happen through undeniable, public demonstrations of my love and power that leave no room for doubt about my reality. The vision began to fade, but before it ended completely, God showed me one final, heart-wrenching scene. I saw myself as a very old man, sitting in a comfortable chair, looking back on decades of a life spent in supernatural ministry that had touched millions of souls. But what moved me to tears was not the scale of the impact. It was the look of deep, profound satisfaction on my own face. The satisfaction that came from knowing that I had been faithful to the calling God had given me, that I had chosen the supernatural over the safe, faith over familiarity, his best over my good. The choice is yours, Jonathan, God said, his voice echoing as the vision dissolved, and I found myself sitting back on the Malibu beach, the sky now a deep, star-filled indigo. You can have a good career doing familiar things, or you can have an extraordinary calling doing impossible things. Both paths honor me, but only one releases the fullness of what I want to accomplish through your life. As the last traces of the sunset disappeared over the Pacific, God's visible presence began to fade from view, but his final words rang in my heart with the clarity of a perfectly struck bell. The world needs to see that I am real, that I am present, that I am still performing miracles. They will believe it when they see it demonstrated through someone they already trust. That someone could be you if you are willing to trade security for the supernatural. And then he was gone. I was alone on that beach, left with the most staggering, beautiful, and terrifying vision of the future I had ever received. The first step of faith. I sat on that cold Malibu beach long after the sun had disappeared, staring up at the first stars as they appeared in the darkening sky, my mind racing to process the sheer magnitude of what God had just shown me. The vision was so vast, so far beyond anything I had ever dared to imagine for my future, that a small, rational part of my brain wondered if I had simply dreamed it all. But the profound peace that settled in my heart, the diamond-hard clarity that now filled my mind, and the supernatural excitement that coursed through my veins confirmed it beyond any doubt. This had been a genuine encounter with divine purpose. The very first thing I did was pull out my phone and call my agent. It was 9 p.m. on the West Coast, well past business hours, but I knew with absolute certainty that I could not wait until morning to make this decision. "I'm not taking the television deal," I told him without any preamble or explanation. There was a long, stunned pause on the other end of the line. "Jonathan, are you sure? This is a multi-million-dollar opportunity. Complete creative control. Offers like this don't come around often. Maybe sleep on it?" "I'm sure," I said, feeling more certain than I had about anything in months. God has something different planned for me. Something that requires me to be completely available for his direction, rather than committed to a multi-year project. My agent was gracious, as always, but I could hear the confusion and concern in his voice. He clearly thought I was making a catastrophic career mistake. After we hung up, I immediately called the media company executives and personally, respectfully declined their incredible offer. I thanked them for their confidence in me, but explained that I felt called in a different direction. The next morning, I began to take the first, tangible steps toward the future God had revealed. Instead of fielding calls about my next entertainment project, I started researching ministers who operated in the kind of supernatural power I had witnessed in the vision. I reached out to evangelists who saw miraculous, documented healings in their meetings. I contacted pastors who had led genuine city-transforming revival movements. I connected with missionaries who had witnessed entire regions turn to Christ after supernatural demonstrations of God's power. Over the next few weeks, I arranged to visit several of these ministries, not as a celebrity guest, but as a humble student. I attended healing services in Redding, California, where I quietly watched from the back as people with medically documented conditions received instant, complete healing through simple prayer. I spent time with missionaries in the highlands of Guatemala, who shared stories of entire villages coming to faith after witnessing undeniable supernatural signs. But most importantly, I began the internal preparation God had shown me was so necessary. I committed to spending 3 hours every single morning in prayer and Bible study, not as preparation for a career, but for the transformation of my character. I started fasting one day each week, not to get blessings from God, but simply to seek His heart. I began meeting regularly with a spiritual mentor, a seasoned and humble man of God who could help me navigate the difficult transition from a ministry of entertainment to a ministry of the supernatural. The changes in my own life were immediate and dramatic. Within just a month, I began to experience spiritual gifts I had never operated in before. During a small prayer meeting at my local church, I found myself receiving what the Bible calls words of knowledge, supernatural insights about people's hidden physical conditions and emotional struggles. As I nervously shared these insights and then prayed for the individuals, several experienced instant healing and profound emotional breakthrough. 3 months after the encounter on the beach, I received my first invitation to speak at a church conference. The invitation wasn't about my acting career or my experiences on The Chosen. The pastor had heard from a mutual friend about the unusual things that were happening when I prayed for people, and he wanted me to share my testimony about this transition from entertainment to a supernatural ministry. The conference was in Phoenix, Arizona, with about 800 attendees. I was terrified. I had never spoken publicly about miraculous healings or my own supernatural encounters. But as I stood on that stage and began to share my testimony, recounting God's vision for my future, His presence fell on that meeting in a way I had never experienced before. From a platform, as I described the beach encounter and God's call to a supernatural ministry, people all throughout the audience began to weep, to shake under the power of the Holy Spirit, and to cry out to God. When I finished speaking, I invited anyone who needed healing to come forward for prayer. To my astonishment, nearly half the audience responded, flooding the front of the auditorium. What happened next was precisely what I had seen in God's vision. As I began to pray for people, supernatural healings began occurring immediately, one after another. A woman who had suffered from chronic back pain for over a decade was instantly healed, bending and twisting without any pain for the first time in years. A man with type 2 diabetes checked his blood sugar monitor during the prayer and saw his levels normalize right before his eyes. A teenager who had battled severe depression for years experienced a complete emotional healing, her face radiant with an overwhelming supernatural joy. But the most powerful and unforgettable moment came when I prayed for a little girl, no more than 6 years old, who had cerebral palsy. As her parents held her and I gently placed my hands on her head, I felt the power of God flow through me like a current of electricity. Within minutes, that precious child, who had never taken an unassisted step in her life, took her first wobbly steps across the platform as the entire audience erupted in worship, tears, and utter amazement. That Phoenix conference became the launching point for everything God had shown me in the vision. Word spread like wildfire through Christian networks about the unusual supernatural power that was accompanying my ministry. Invitations began pouring in from churches and conferences around the world, all wanting to experience the kind of miraculous demonstrations they had heard about. 6 months after the beach encounter, I spoke at my first stadium event. 25,000 people in Dallas, Texas. The response was exactly what I had seen in God's vision. Thousands were healed, delivered from bondage, and spiritually transformed as the tangible presence of God fell powerfully throughout the entire arena. Local news stations covered the event, reporting on medically documented healings that doctors could not explain by any natural cause. The momentum continued to build. 12 months after I declined that life-changing television deal, I was speaking to crowds of 50,000 people or more in major cities across America, witnessing the exact kind of supernatural demonstrations I had seen in the vision. But more importantly, I was beginning to see the broader awakening God had promised. Other prominent believers in entertainment, sports, business, and even government were also stepping into their own forms of supernatural ministry, creating a powerful network of voices demonstrating God's reality across every sphere of society. 18 months after that encounter on the Malibu beach, I received an invitation that shocked even me. The United Nations wanted me to address the General Assembly on the topic of faith-based solutions to global conflicts. The invitation had come about because several world leaders had quietly attended my meetings in their countries and had witnessed supernatural demonstrations of God's love that had profoundly impacted their understanding of how divine wisdom could be applied to governance. Standing before the representatives from 193 nations, sharing not about politics or religion, but about God's heart for peace and justice, I watched in awe as the same supernatural presence that filled stadiums began to move through that august assembly. Diplomats who had been sworn enemies for decades found themselves embracing with tears streaming down their faces. World leaders began requesting private meetings to discuss how biblical principles could truly transform their nations from the inside out. Now, 2 years after that sunset encounter on the beach, I am living the exact future God showed me in that vision. Not every single detail has unfolded yet, but every major element is either currently happening or is clearly and powerfully developing. The supernatural ministry, the global impact, the stadium gatherings, the influence with world leaders, all of it is becoming reality, not through human effort or strategic planning, but through the raw, undeniable power of God. But the most amazing part of this journey isn't the external manifestations, as incredible as they are. It is the internal transformation that has accompanied this calling. The deep-seated insecurity, the crippling need for people's approval, and the subtle spiritual pride that had characterized my earlier years have been slowly but surely replaced by a quiet confidence that comes from knowing God's unconditional love, a holy boldness that flows from operating in His power, and a genuine humility that recognizes that every single supernatural breakthrough is His gift, not my achievement, your invitation to the supernatural. I wanted to share this story with you not to highlight my own journey, but because I believe with all my heart that God has divine encounters and personal revelations waiting for you that are just as specific and life-transforming as what He showed me on that beach. The 10 truths God revealed to me about His plans have become my personal framework for understanding divine calling, and I believe they can be for you too. Your future is not about career advancement. It's about kingdom advancement. God's vision for your life is always infinitely bigger than just your personal success. God calls you based on the gifts He is going to give you, not just the gifts you already have. Never limit His possibilities for your life by your current abilities. Your individual calling is part of a global awakening. You are not just building your own ministry or business. You are participating in the greatest spiritual harvest in history. God wants to use you to demonstrate His power in ways that convince skeptics and transform cultures, not just encourage believers. Stepping into God's full vision for your life will require you to leave your comfort zone and trust Him for abilities you do not currently possess. You will often face a choice between good opportunities and a supernatural calling. Both may honor God, but only one releases His fullness through your life. God's greatest plans almost always start with you saying no to secure logical options and yes to faith-requiring steps. Supernatural ministry requires supernatural character. God is far more interested in transforming who you are than just changing what you do. The preparation for an extraordinary calling always includes seasons of intensive prayer, fasting, and deep character development. God's ultimate purpose is to demonstrate His love and His reality to a world that has desperately forgotten that both are real. Maybe you are reading this right now and wondering what God's vision for your future might be. Maybe you find yourself at a critical crossroads, trying to choose between a secure opportunity and a faith-requiring possibility. Maybe you have been sensing for years that God has something much bigger planned for your life, but you haven't known how to discover what it is. From my own journey, here is what I have learned about receiving vision from God. First, you must create space for an encounter. God rarely reveals His grandest visions in the midst of busy schedules and constant digital distractions. Find a time and a place for extended, quiet prayer and listening. Second, ask specific questions about purpose, not just provision. Instead of praying, God, please bless my plans, dare to ask, God, what are your plans for my life? Instead of, help me succeed, ask, how do you want to use my life for your kingdom? Third, be willing to hear answers that require radical faith. God's vision for your life will always be bigger than what you can accomplish through your own talent and effort. If His plan doesn't absolutely require His supernatural intervention, it's probably not his best plan for you. Finally, take the first step, even if you can't see the whole staircase. You do not need to understand every detail of God's plan to begin moving in the direction He is showing you. The vision God showed me on that Malibu beach wasn't just about my future. It was about His future, His grand, beautiful plans for awakening the world to His reality and His love. Your calling, whatever it is a vital part of that same global movement. Whether you are in business, education, healthcare, government, entertainment, or any other sphere, God needs your voice in your life to demonstrate His character to the world. Let us pray. Father God, I pray for every single person reading these words right now who is seeking your vision for their future, who wants to know how you plan to use their one precious life for your eternal kingdom purposes. Thank you that you have specific, tailor-made plans for each of us that are far beyond anything we could ever ask or imagine. Give everyone who seeks your vision the courage to create sacred space for an encounter with you. Help them to ask the right questions and to listen for the answers that will require them to walk by faith. Show them that you have supernatural plans for their natural lives and extraordinary purposes for their ordinary circumstances. For those standing at a crossroads between security and calling, give them the divine wisdom to choose your best over their safe. For those in a season of preparation for a vision that has not yet fully manifested, grant them patience and faithfulness in the process. For those who have received a vision but feel overwhelmed by its magnitude, remind them that you always provide everything necessary to accomplish what you call them to do. Help all of us to remember that we are living in the greatest season of spiritual awakening in human history, and that you are raising up voices across every sphere of influence to demonstrate your glorious reality to a watching world. In Jesus' mighty name, Amen. The most important truth I learned on that Malibu beach is the truth that can transform anyone's understanding of their future. God's vision for your life is always bigger than your vision for your life. He sees possibilities you cannot imagine. He has purposes you have not yet considered, and He wants to accomplish things through you that will utterly astound you. You do not have to settle for an ordinary life when God is offering you an extraordinary one. You do not have to choose the safe path when He is providing a supernatural one. You do not have to limit yourself to human possibilities when divine purposes are available to you. Your future is not just about personal success. It is about kingdom impact. Your calling is not just about individual fulfillment. It is about global transformation. Your life is not just your story. It is His story, being written through you. Thank you for allowing me to share the most staggering vision I have ever received. I love you all, and I believe with all my heart that God has encounters with His purpose for your future that will astound you just as much as what He showed me on that beach.